So, without further ado, I present to you the next two speakers, the Snells.
Thank you. Hello, how's everyone doing? All right. So, just here to talk a little bit about some of the work that I've been working on and in the community. Within, I work on Cloudflare Workers, I work on Node. There's some stuff that kind of works across both of these environments. So I'm just kind of talk a little bit about some of this thing. I'm super excited, though. I am joined by my son. He wanted to come out to the conference. He came out last year, was sitting out there. He wanted to come out again this year. I told him, if you do that, you got to get up on stage with me. So he's going to do the demo part of this. So just very excited about it. There's a very easy way to tell us apart. I'm the old one. He's the young one. Some background on me, for those that don't know. I have been involved with Node Core for a number of years, since 2015. I also work on Cloudflare Workers, actually on the runtime itself. There's an open source part of that called WorkerD that you can find if you go out to the Cloudflare's GitHub organization. I'm also one of the co-founders and the co-chair of the Winter CG, which is the Web Interoperable Runtimes Community Group. That's the organization that's kind of starting to focus on getting Deno and Bun and Node and Workers just kind of start aligning on a lot of the APIs. And what we're going to be talking about here is actually one of the APIs. It's actually the first new API that community group has been incubating. Aaron, he writes code. Most parents, they kind of have to wonder what their kids are doing online. I go into his room and I catch him learning the C++ standard libs. So just nerd. Takes after me very well. All right, so why are we going to talk about socket APIs? A couple years ago when I started at Cloudflare, we started, had this idea that we wanted to implement TCP socket support. So Workers has always been an HTTP-based environment. So it's implemented fetch. You can go out and do all the fetch requests you want, but you couldn't talk to a database, right, unless it had a REST API. So one of the first things first thing I was asked to look at was, how do we talk to a database from this environment? What's special about this Workers environment that makes this kind of hard is it's a completely sandboxed environment. The scripts that are running have no access to the file system. They can't open a raw socket, can't open a file descriptor, can't open a pipe. All it can do is talk to this managed environment. So we had to figure out how we were actually going to make this happen. The very first question was, what API were we going to use? And this ends up being a surprisingly difficult question to answer, right? Because there is no standard for opening a socket connection from JavaScript, right? Now, Node's had an API for years, right? So we have this net connect. It's there. It works. Everyone's using it. If you look at all of the database drivers that are out there on NPM, they're all using that connect. Deno comes along. Deno added Deno connect. Cool. All right. So there's two ways of doing it, right? Then Bun comes along and says, hey, we want to make this faster, so we're going to do this a completely different way and have Bun connect, right? So as a fourth runtime coming in and asking this question, what do we want to do here? Which one of these APIs should we use, right? Now, Node is by far the more common one. That's the one that all the existing modules out there are making use of. But it turns out Node's API is actually quite complicated. Node Connect or Net Connect depends on event emitter, streams, crypto, DNS, timers, async local storage. I mean, there is a ton there under the covers on how that is actually implemented. The other assumption that Net Connect makes is that you're actually writing directly to the socket, right? You're writing directly to that FD. There's a number of things in there that Node is assuming that you have available to you as a developer, and as the runtime's actually able to talk to that socket directly. Okay. The other aspect of this, it's not just the API surface, right? We have events and callbacks rather than promises. We have process next tick, which is a very Node-specific thing. It's tied very specifically to how Node does async. You have access to the file descriptors in a sandbox environment. You may not have those things. Setting socket options directly, an environment may not actually have a socket to set options on, right? It may be going through like a connect tunnel or proxy and that kind of thing. Then, of course, more and kind of like the async local storage, there's async context propagation, there's all these things that kind of play into that. So that API, just saying, hey, implement Node, is actually quite difficult. Now, we're going through the process of doing that, but if you look at Deno and you look at Bun and you look at the efforts that they've made, and they've said, okay, we're going to be compatible with Node, what does that mean? That basically means implementing Node, right? And Node is large. It's huge. There's a lot of work there. And despite the claims, like the claims is like, oh, these are intended to be drop-in replacements for Node, they're not, right? They're getting there. They're making progress there. But for something like Workers, we have no intention of duplicating the entire Node API surface area. So we want this functionality. We want a net connect, but we don't want to implement net connect, right? So it's and it also goes back to this point that I make with WinterCG all the time. You have at least 4 runtimes now that all need to do the same thing, make a network connection. Why should they do them in 4 completely different ways, right? Same thing, goes back to URL parsing, right? There doesn't need to be 4 different URL parsers, right? When there is the same functionality across these runtimes, they should be implemented in the same way. Now, there's still room for platform-specific stuff. I'm not saying that like any of these, like Net is going to, or the socket API I'm going to talk about here is going to replace Net Connect. There's still going to be room for that, but it still makes sense to start getting some alignment. One of the fun facts, TLS socket in Node accepts 49 distinct configuration options just on Net Connect. We have no idea if those are actually being used. Node collects no telemetry. If you go talk to the database driver developers and say, okay, which one of these options are people using? Like, we don't know. We just pass through whatever options people give us, and we don't actually keep track of it. So there are things like pre-shared keys and a bunch of other callbacks. We have no clue whatsoever which of those are actually being used. So again, Deno and Bun present alternatives. But, and we could, from Workers' point of view, we could say, okay, let's implement Deno Connect. But what's the problem there? We're chasing another runtime, right? This Deno and Bun globals that they have, very powerful. They can do a lot of stuff. It's great. I'm not complaining about it. But it's not portable. It ends up locking you into those runtimes. And then we end up having to just duplicate their APIs and all of their quirks and everything else. And we end up with the exact same problem. All right? So what do we want? We want a simple way to open a socket, right? We want it to be based on web platform standards. We want to reduce complexity. We want to focus on the basics. What are the basics? Open a connection, send data, receive data. That's it. Okay? So what have we done? We have a new socket API proposal that is being incubated within WinterCG. This started with an implementation in Cloudflare Workers. So, I said, we don't want a 4th API. Well, we created a 4th API. The hope, though, is that we've done this in a way that the other runtimes can implement, right? And they can do so in a very consistent, clear, standards-based way, right? So we have the spec out there. It is very much draft. It is very much a work in progress. We have it out on GitHub under the WinterCG organization. Everything you see here, if you want to participate and help with this, please come do this. We also have a polyfill implementation that was primarily written by Ethan Arrowwood, who unfortunately couldn't make it here. But he's been working on this for a couple months. Aaron's been jumping in and helping with some of the implementation as well. All right, this is basically what it looks like. Again, focusing on the bare basics of what we want to accomplish. We have connect, which is intended, right now in the implementations, it's something you have to import, but the intent is this for to be a global connect, just like global fetch. Pass in your address what you want to connect to. Pass in a few options, and we're keeping those options intentionally very minimal right from the start, because we want people to explicitly ask us for things, so we know that people are actually using these things. It's based on web streams, readable, writable, and promise-based. And that's really the extent of the API right now, right? So with a node stream or a node socket, there's something like 30 to 40 different methods and properties and events and stuff that are exposed on there. This is all we have on this, right? Keeping it Drop dead simple. These are standard readable streams, standard writable streams. The promise is unsurprising. Socket info will tell you where you're connecting to, to your local address, remote address, that kind of thing. And then you have a closed and open promise. All right? Currently supports plain text, TLS, opportunistic TLS. If you're not familiar with what that is, it's also called start TLS. You can start a connection in plain text and upgrade it to TLS later on. A lot of the database drivers support that. SNI, which is basically how you specify your server name when you open the connection, and ALPN, which is the higher level protocol negotiation. So when you open a TLS connection and you say, okay, I want to talk HTTP2, right? You can use ALPN to tell it, all right, this is going to be an HTTP2 connection, that kind of thing. The protocol itself, the API, is designed to be very agnostic of the protocols. And so talking to pipes, domain sockets, IPC, even QUIC. When QUIC ultimately does land in Node and in these environments, this API should be useful for that as well. And that includes some of the newer QUIC features like unidirectional streams. In that case, the socket will just have either the readable side or the writable side closed, and the other side will still be usable. It's still the same API. Now, there are other features there that may not actually get exposed directly, but if you need those, then again, there is room for these runtimes to expose a more specific API, right? So there are escape hatches here. And flexible configuration and implementation choices. This one's key because it goes back to that point about all the configuration options you can pass into Node. In something like Workers, which is a managed environment, we might not actually want to expose an API that has all these features. We may want to have some out-of-band configuration. We want to support that kind of model here as well. So you want to see a demo real quick? Aaron, take it.
Okay. So let's go into here. All right. So who remembers what Gopher is? All right. So we have a Gopher server. It's hosted in California, so let's see how the ping is. We're just going to be using that as a demo here. You can see here, we're just creating a socket object here, say connecting to it with the method my dad talked about earlier. Notice that we're not awaiting it because it's not async. It's completely synchronous just because it doesn't need to be async. That does mean that it can return before the socket is opened, but that doesn't mean you need to wait for it to open, especially because readable and writable streams, they're async that they can handle it pretty much. We're not passing in any configuration objects options here as well. If we wanted to, we could, just create by passing the object there, but we won't be just for simplicity. Then there's the socket that opened, like I was talking about earlier, that passes in the socket info, or if you wanted to wait for the socket to open for whatever reason. After that, though, it's just other APIs that have been already introduced and are already implemented in many other runtimes. So grabbing the writable stream here, encoding the path here, we're just fetching the root from the server, sending that over to the Gopher server, and then grabbing the readable stream, fetching the response, and decoding it back into a string, logging it, and then closing the API, or closing the socket. Really, really simple. You can load up, just doing node, index.js, and boom, there you go. So it's working right there. If you want to test this out, it's with Ethan's demo I had linked earlier. It's also available in npm under here. It's using Node APIs under the hood, and so it's not explicitly trying to be compatible with other runtimes as of right now. That being said, Deno does implement the APIs necessary, so we can run it in Deno, like that. So boom, there you go. But yeah, and yeah.
So, they did try to get it to run in Bun, but there are still some bugs in Bun's implementation of basically the readable stream implementation. So, hopefully we got an issue open for that. Hopefully that'll work. This demo was actually ported from the Cloudflare Workers demo for Socket, so it's basically the same code working there as well. So yeah, and like I said, super simple. There's not much to it, and that's intentional. We fully recognize that there needs to be more features added to this. So like TLS configuration, you need to be able to specify the key, possibly the CA, right? There's additional features that need to be pulled out here. But we don't want to add them yet. We want the community to come and specifically say, we have to have this, and if enough people ask for it, then yes, we'll add it. The intention is so that we don't just go throw the kitchen sink at everything and throw a bunch of, end up with a space where we just have another complex API like Node Connect or Net Connect. So on that point, GitHub, WinterCG, proposal, Socket API, this is where we're doing this work. Our intention is to incubate this within WinterCG. What it's like we have it implemented natively in one runtime. My plan is in Node to implement this there. So as I'm continuing to work on the QUIC implementation, it's going to use this API, or as close to the API as possible, and work on other implementations of this in Node. We're talking with Deno, we're talking with Bun, trying to convince the runtimes to collaborate and work together on driving this thing forward. So WinterCG is where we want to do that work, and then ultimately, WinterCG itself does not actually publish a standard, but our goal is eventually to find a home where this becomes an official kind of web platform standard. We'll figure out exactly where that lives, but that might take some take some time to get there. Just a shout out to Dominic Pinchetta, who's engineer on a team at Cloudflare, who did the implementation there and the initial work on the spec, and then Ethan also, who did the implementation work on the prototype, and Aaron, who's helping out with adding stuff. He just landed a PR yesterday on adding that open promise to it, and that's it. Got plenty of time for questions. Wanted to keep it intentionally simple and quick. Thank you.
Love that. Do we have any questions? I'll just start here and I'll work my way over that direction. Question.
First off, lovely work. Thank you so much. Very quick question about complete WebSocket support in Node. Is that something that's on the cards ever? So can we ever replace WS? Or is this just going to be for server to server?
Yes, so WebSocket support is landing in Node. I think it's already landed, correct? Yes, so
yes,
WebSocket support is there.
It landed.
But it's client side right now, right?
Yeah, it's client side only. So you have a WebSocket global now. It's behind the flag, but it will be unflagged in the next major or something. Only on client for client, mostly because I don't know many of you are aware. WebSocket is probably one of the worst specified APIs of the whole web.
Yes.
Okay, the other one is Navigator apparently. But this is a pun that only a few Node Core collaborator can get it at this point. It's not good for servers, okay? Like a standard compliant WebSocket API is not good for servers. Don't use it for servers.
Well,
okay?
I will catch that. Within Workers, we do use the WebSocket API on a server side, but we had to tweak it so that it actually would work reasonably well. So it's not a great API. Hopefully we can get more work on it.
What I was trying to say here is it's not, like, if you want it to be spec compliant,
yeah, it's hard.
You cannot do a good job about it, okay? There is limitation, like, I don't know, for example, if you send a message, there is no way to know that your message has been sent, and which is a major problem if you're writing streaming software. So anyway, Sorry about this.
Okay, I saw another question up front. Suspense. A question over here?
Hi again. I love how when James was like, plenty of time for questions, and then he like looked at me. I was like, was that intentional?
I was looking around.
Oh, really? Okay. I guess I'm just internalizing. All right. So first of all, amazing talk. And I told like James yesterday that when I become a mom, if like my 16-year-old isn't giving talks with me at NodeConf, I've failed. So just new bar. So my question is essentially, I've been thinking a lot about runtimes, as you know, like all the different JavaScript runtimes and that are in this server context now. And so I'm curious, do you feel like there's like a new governance body that's going to kind of form to kind of bring together folks from Deno and Bun and Cloudflare and Node to talk and W3C to kind of talk through, and potentially even TC39 to talk through implementations and design and to kind of work on specs together, because obviously there's a need now to kind of have some interoperability, right? So I'm just curious about that.
Okay. So I wouldn't call it a governance body at all. The intent, for Winter CG was not to say, here's a spec, you've got to follow it, right? And which is really kind of that governance idea. What was happening before was that you had Node would go talk to WG or W3C and say, hey, what about these requirements? And like, well, you're not a browser, we don't care. Deno would go to the same, go to them and like, well, you're not a browser, we don't necessarily, care about that case. So each individual runtime was having these conversations, and it kept coming back with the same answer. And then we realized, well, why don't we coordinate amongst ourselves and kind of go as a group and present an argument together. So the idea was really just that coordination role of, let's get together, figure out what we think needs to happen, and then try to advance the argument forward. But the intent was never to create a new standards body, a new governance body. It was just, we're doing the same things, let's be talking, right? Let's be working together. Let's, let's iterate on these things together. Another part of the difference is we don't want to spend a year creating a spec and then go tell everyone to implement it and conform to it. What I'd rather do, and it's much more productive, is let's go implement some stuff. Let's do it in a consistent way, right? Let's collaborate as we're going through and implementing this, right? And then when we've coalesced on something that we all think works, then we'll stamp it, right? Then we'll push it out to a standards body, and then we'll say, we think this is what the ecosystem needs because this is what the ecosystem is using, right? So it takes that idea of a governance body and kind of flips it on its head. The runtimes themselves still have the control of what actually happens, but we're talking, right? And we're collaborating and working together. So, yeah.
Great response. Let's call it there. Thank you so much, James and Aaron, the Snell Dream Team. Big round of applause. So I would also like to mention that James is the community guidelines ambassador. So if you have any issues, any personal issues, please do reach out to James. As you can see, he's like dad. He is dad. So anything, he'll keep it confidential. He'll keep it between you and him, and he will make sure that you have all the resources that you need. The next speaker is somebody I know quite well, quite humbled the fact that I work with him on the same team as him. He is a Node.js TSC member on the security working group. Before I call out his name, I'd just like to make one more announcement. Make sure I have my paper in the right direction. For the React Native workshop this afternoon, you'd also want to have Expo or Expo Go, depending what platform, installed on your mobile device. So one last thing before I introduce the next speaker. I'd also like to thank a couple of our gold sponsors, which would be Bloomberg Engineering. I think they are a long-term sponsor for NodeConf, so a lot of big thanks to them.